Welcome everybody to this final Marine Money webinar of 2020. Everyone at Marine Money hopes that you've enjoyed them and benefited from them. We've been pleased to have been able to adjust so quickly starting last April by using technology to keep us all connected with each other in the marketplace. I'd like to thank my team for bringing something into reality that certainly I couldn't have done. And while I'm proud of the mastery of the technology, I'm looking forward to it becoming a subordinate part at face-to-face meetings at some point next year. Allow me also to thank you, each and every one of you out there, for your continued connection with our business, your ideas, engagement, energy, contributions, and most importantly, your friendship. You have sustained us these past 10 months. And a special thank you to our members for making it possible for us to do what we do. Today, we're going to talk about the first full year since the Global Maritime Forum launched the Poseidon Principles. I personally feel what we are about to hear may be the most important conference session of my quite long career. But I say that humbly, but with significant pride for what our industry has accomplished this year. In the first instance, I'm talking at this time of year about the remarkable work of the women and men aboard the industries, aboard your ships around the world. They've worked safely and sacrificed so much to keep the global supply chain running, providing countries of the world an opportunity to help manage the pandemic. They can't hear me, but I know I express the gratefulness of us all. As if that alone was not enough of an achievement for our industry, the Poseidon Principles, which at the time of launch became the first sector-specific climate alignment agreement for financial institutions, yesterday publicly announced another major milestone, the conclusion of the first reporting period under the principle. That we were not regulated into the actions is a tribute to what we can do and what I know we will continue to do in the months and years ahead. The flywheel is spinning faster, and there is no stopping leaders like those with us today and all of you. We're privileged to have some of the Poseidon Principles chief architects and leading ship owners with us today, each representing our industry's powerful, voluntary commitment to mitigating climate change. Lois Zabrocki, CEO of International Seaways. Hugo DeStoop, CEO at Euronav. Michael Parker, Chairman, Global Shipping and Logistics at Citi. Paul Taylor, Global Head of Shipping and Offshore, Societe Generale. And Lindsay Keeble, Partner at Global Head of Maritime at Watson, Farley and Williams. Just one last housekeeping item. On the right-hand side of your screen, and many of you are veterans of our webinars, there's a box where you can type in your questions. Lindsay will run a panel discussion, at the conclusion of which Marine Money's John Chia will take your questions and feed them to Lindsay to direct to our panels. You might, if you have a specific question for a specific panelist, direct it that way yourself. To the 5 participants today, my thanks not only for your support, but to you and all on your team for your leadership of this great industry's voluntary fight against climate change. And now it's a pleasure to turn the proceedings over to Lindsay, whose support and whose firm support today and throughout the year has been enormous. Thank you. Lindsay, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the intro. I think as most people are aware, Watson Farley provided support to the development of the Poseidon Principles. So we are also really proud to be part of this webinar at this significant moment to look back at the first year's reporting results from the initiative. I think it's been very interesting to see over the past year the approach that both lenders and owners have taken towards bringing the Poseidon Principles into documentation, and also sort of the information providing and how that's gone out, how that's played out. I think the initiative has really been very inspiring for us. We've launched an ESG survey, which will come out early next year. And I think it's clear to us, the results show that the Poseidon Principles is just the first step that all stakeholders in the industry are looking to take to match and meet the decarbonisation challenge. So I'm really keen to hear from Paul and Michael as to their plans for the future, and to Hugo and Lois as well as to how they've welcomed the initiative. So Michael, just a couple of words from you to kick us off.
Thank you, Lindsay, and let me pass on the significance, other than to say it is very, very significant, and time will clearly tell that. I'll let my fellow panelists answer that in a little bit more detail. I want to thank, though, Marine Money, German Marine Money, for not just today, but also for helping us at the very successful launch in June. I think that kickoff with the 11 signatories, with Paul, myself, and Kristen host of DMB was a very significant event in itself. But I also want to thank particularly the industry. So Hugo, who played such an important role during the drafting, and on an ongoing basis, the leadership of people in the industry like Hugo for this have been absolutely important, that this was a partnership with our clients. And then to Lois of International Seaways, and particularly also Jeff Prebor and Bill Nugent, senior management team, for the way in which they've adopted these principles, which I think illustrates the point Paul and I were making at the time about this partnership. I'd also want to thank Paul. Sometimes Paul and I had to remember we actually worked for different organizations, but our fellow signatories too, who've worked through this, and you, Lindsay, for all your support during that process from Watson Farley. To me, this has been a year of collaboration, and COVID may have accelerated that. We couldn't have done this without this collaboration. I think this collaboration is truly one of the transformative things for our industry, which we'll no doubt talk about during the rest of this panel.
Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. And Michael, thank you very much. Thanks for your leadership over the last 18 months. I'd just like to say that this is a significant milestone for the shipping industry. It's the first tiny step towards transparency and accountability amongst banks and export credit agencies. And the most important thing is not the results that have been published in the last couple of days. It's just the first step. What is important is it's not a competition. It's about the direction of travel that we're all going in, and how we're going to get to that destination in terms of our behavioural change. So it's just the first tiny step, but I do believe that this will become a standard for the shipping industry, and it's a very, very important moment.
Lois?
Yeah, good day to everybody. You know, the mantra of if you don't measure it, you can't manage it, and you can't manage it and improve it. I think that's been put aside by the Poseidon Principles and the report that they rolled out. You know, at Seaways, we did a sustainability loan early this year. I think we were the first publicly traded company to do that. We just rolled out our inaugural ESG report. But all of these are just early efforts in a journey that we're all on together.
Thanks. Hugo?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting us. I think at Euronav, this has always been very important. In fact, we chose our tagline, the ocean is our environment, 15 years ago. So we always had an eye on those matters. We're very happy to help the development of what is now becoming a standard clause in loan agreements. I fully concur with Lois that the importance of the event is also because you're forcing, in a way, people to measure. And if they don't measure in the first place, they cannot decrease their emissions. Last but not least, this is, for me, part of an industry effort. So the more stakeholders are in it, the faster the industry as a whole will reach the goals set by the IMO and hopefully go beyond those goals. But I suppose that we can discuss that at a later stage.
Thanks, thank you. So Michael, perhaps to you to kick off. So the publishing of the first climate alignment scores completes the first full cycle. Since the announcement in June, has everything gone sort of according to plan to get to this milestone?
One can't say everything, of course, has gone to plan, because as I keep getting asked, you know, when are the Chinese going to sign? I think clearly COVID has set us back a little bit, but we are now up to 20 signatories, and I think we're confident that we will get more signatories during the course of the next year. I think overall, yes, it actually went to plan, and I give credit to the Global Maritime Forum and the Secretariat of the Poseidon Principles for keeping us disciplined and focused. I think a large part of that was working together to make sure that we were getting the information we needed. And I think apart from some initial issues, the ship owners, you know, were very good at sharing the data with us and then working through how we were going to do our calculations. We actually, unlike various other international discussions, we met our deadline of November the 30th and were able to produce the report on December the 16th. So I think it went as well as could be expected, and the participation level, which we measured as part of the debt outstanding rather than the number of vessels or whatever, was in the 90% for most of us. And so, and then some of the difference is data that was really not really accessible or whatever. So I think a great success, but as Paul and I have been discussing, we'll not only learn a lot as individual lenders around our own portfolios, but the way the process happened, I think we will improve on it for next year, and we'll get down to that, once we're all back early next year. So I think it went as well as could be expected.
Originally, Michael, there was talk about having a technical solution for the data collection. So then there were some challenges getting this off the ground. Is that still sort of ongoing work?
Yes, it is ongoing work. It was a great idea that came out of one of the major classification societies, but for one reason or another, it never sort of got off the ground in time for this purpose. The reason for it, the role the classification societies play in the verification of the data, and the rather sort of neutral role they play, which from an audit perspective could be valuable to each of us as institutions. The real issue, though, is in the data, and creating some sort of independent data exchange platform which would make the calculation process much simpler. I think its time will come, and hopefully in time for the next year results, for the simple reason that with the sea cargo charter and other financial sectors like insurance beginning to look at the same data for the purposes of their business, the demand for that data and for that data to have been properly verified, I think will be there. So we're continuing to work through the GMF around creating or working with other people to create a platform. I think that this data will, I've called it a currency for 2021. I think what will happen, and Hugo may well have a view on this, of course, because he probably promised to publish all his data at some point. I think the point is everyone will want to see this data, and so having everyone understand what the data means, I think, is going to be a key part of that.
So, I mean, Hugo, you are now, you've been involved in this project from the outset. From your perspective, how have you found the process to getting to this point, and were there any main concerns for you?
Well, not really. I mean, and to answer Michael's question, we've been publishing our emissions already 3 years, so this is not something totally new to us. Now, of course, the format was a little bit different. It's a huge collection of data, and what was interesting was also the exchange we had with the various financial institutions. I mean, at the moment, we are giving those data to 10 banks, 10 different banks. So out of 20, that's half of the group. And the majority of them came back with questions. So it's not like a tick the box exercise and you send your data and you never hear about financial institutions who are looking at it. It's very constructive. I mean, we had very interesting questions to which we were happy to provide an answer. And I think that for a first year, it was relatively smooth, even though I would expect that next year the process will be streamlined, be it by way of standardization, or simply because you have done it once, and so the second time is always easier.
Lois, so we were very much aware, talking to the lenders and the Poseidon Principles Committee, that they were keen to take a very uniform approach when approaching the ship owners for the data. Was that obvious to you on the receiving end as a borrower?
No, absolutely. I mean, with our group of lenders, ABN stepped up to be, really the lead with regard to, the Poseidon Principles element of our loan. And it was quite simple to share our data with them. To Hugo's point, there were some questions that, exchange, and we did have our head of technical, Bill Nugent, collaborating with them directly. But the transfer of the information was really, really quite simple. And we use Lloyd's lists for the independent verification of our data, which, is something that we set up early on. And it is, for the owners, I mean, we are collecting this data in any case, but the key thing for the ships is really that you don't want these guys to have to enter this data multiple times, right? So as we move forward, as efficient as we can possibly be for our seafarers is absolutely critical.
What feedback would you give to sort of owners that are nervous about this, that maybe haven't been involved in the process so far?
Yeah, we are capturing all of this data. I mean, I think every ship owner today is tasked with capturing everything in any case, and we all have to meet the IMO trajectories, as we move forward. So there's no time to lose with collaborating and getting on about the task.
Okay, thanks. Paul, I think one thing that we heard very early on, and we were very conscious of this when drafting the covenants, related to confidentiality and sort of the concern that maybe owners wouldn't want to share the data with their lenders. How have you experienced those aspects?
Yeah, that was a very big issue. It became probably even bigger than any of us expected. And I guess it was understandable. The initial concerns were, why do we want the data? What's it got to do with you? What do you need it? What's you going to use it for? Are you going to make a commercial benefit out of it? We had all this from the ship owner fraternity, and so that did take a little bit of a while to allay their concerns. But it was clear. I think it wasn't clear at first that the data was going to be used in an anonymous fashion. And as soon as that became clear, I think it became much less of a concern to ship owners. And in fact, if you actually look at the results, the ones Michael just mentioned just now, where you've got over 90% collection of data, and of the data collected, roughly 95% of the acknowledgement letters were signed by clients, by ship owners, giving banks, export credit agencies the green light to share that data with service providers to help calculate the portfolio scores. That shows the confidence, I think, that ultimately the ship owning community had in the Poseidon Principles, and the fact they didn't have any concerns with regard to confidentiality. And in fact, I remember Hugo on stage in New York back in 2019 saying, let's be part of the solution. And I think that is what ship owners have decided is the best way forward. Let's all be part of the solution. It's a coalition. We're stronger if we're all aligned. And now what's important going forwards, just to repay, I think, the ship owners, is we've got to communicate the results that we've got. And there's a degree of interest amongst our clients at Société Générale is, what are our AER results? What does it mean in comparison with the overall market, obviously respecting confidentialities? And so there's great interest now. So I think the concerns over confidentiality have gone, and now it's much more of a coalition and alignment of how we can all work together and what these results mean and how we can work together for the benefit of the industry.
And a lot of the banks used a sort of third-party service provider, and again, because you managed to convince people and explain that was on an anonymous basis, was that then accepted as well?
Well, some banks use service providers, some didn't, and the acknowledgement letters that were signed allowed banks to use service providers. Where they weren't signed, clearly they couldn't, and the data that would have been given to the service provider would have been completely anonymous. Yeah. So I think that went well. In fact, those banks who decided to calculate the AER results themselves found it surprisingly easy as an exercise to do, and we did that at Société Générale, and we used one of the service providers, London Offshore Consultants, to sort of ratify our figures, act as a sort of an auditor to have some more integrity to the figures. So that worked very well indeed.
And then turning to the results themselves, Paul, what are your key takeaways from the results?
Well, you're asking me to present an hour's presentation in about 2 minutes. I think this is it's pretty up. So this is going to be really high level. As I said at the beginning, what's important is the direction of travel that everybody's heading in. It's the start of this long journey. What is key from the results is that behavioural change is required across the industry. The trajectory will fall at 11% in 5 years. So the fact that 12 of the 15 banks are misaligned already, albeit only by an average of 1.2%. It shows that over the next 5 years, the runway as such was already in deficit, but we've got to find another 11% plus the catch up on misalignment. So behavioural changes is required. I mentioned the fact that there was a good level of data collection, 90% across the 15 banks, which is a very decent score, I think, given the initial concerns. Overall takeaways, the bank scores vary considerably. I said it's not a competition, it's not, but all the results will vary based on several different things. Size of portfolio is important. The weightings that each individual loan have are important. A high loan outstanding on a misaligned vessel is going to have a much bigger impact than a low loan outstanding on another vessel. Different segments had different results. Even credit quality could impact a result in terms of the number of layup vessels one has on the portfolio. So the scores did vary considerably. Age was, of course, a factor across the portfolio, but it wasn't a complete correlation between age and efficiency of vessel. There was more of a correlation in bulk and tankers for age, less so in container shipping, where it was more about the routes and the vessel sizes than age. Those banks that were more exposed to long haul vessels probably had a slightly positive impact than those who are more exposed to shorter haul, because speed of the vessel is important, and of course port time has proved an incredibly important impactor to results. Those vessels spending much more time in port or queuing outside port and tend to have a worse score. So it's too early to draw conclusions. The trends are appearing, but it's going to take a degree of analysis from all the players going forward to look at why they have the results they have. What is interesting is that from the results is that it's not just about investment in new vessels. Of course, that's the long-term aim, zero carbon fuels. That's what the sector wants, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. So what is important, and I think what the first year results are going to show as they are analysed and fully understood, is that there's plenty of things that one can do with existing portfolio in terms of hydrodynamics, in terms of retrofitting of machinery, in terms of digitalization of the fleet, that's going to extend this alignment runway by several years, which will mean that existing ships on the portfolios can be refinanced. It's going to mean that the best-in-class assets and the best-in-class ship owners find access to liquidity very straightforward going forward, and maybe not for those ship owners who aren't looking to optimize the efficiency levels of the vessels. A final point in this very, very quick summary of the results is that some of the trajectories that define the results, determine the results, are going to have to be looked at when there's a technical committee next year. Clearly, cruise has shown itself to be very, very positive in results, whereas some sectors like LNG, for example, has come out particularly badly, not because it's an inefficient segment, but because the way the trajectories have been designed, they're quite narrow. And it means that the smaller vessels in one particular trajectory class tend to perform worse than the larger vessels in that same trajectory. So we do have some work to do to, I think, perfect the way the Poseidon Principles work, but the coming weeks after everyone's taken a break, I think we'll start building some trends so that we can see what the results really mean going forward.
And Michael, what do you think the results mean to encourage sort of new signatories and other people looking at, are they going to now look at it and think, gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be as good as Bank X or Bank Y? Do you think it might make them more nervous, or now that they've seen it in operation, it will encourage people?
Well, I hope it'll encourage people. I think there are two things that come out of it. Picking up on Paul's point, the quality of help we've had from UMass, who provide the trajectories for the BPA, the discussions we've had, and the articulate way in which they've contributed in large part to the report, I think should be assigned to prospective signatories, that an understanding of what this means is part of becoming a signatory. So the first year's report, for those of us 15 who did report, of course, we were, taking a step into the unknown. Had we all been aligned, everyone would have said that's a bit suspicious, isn't it? I think we've ended up where the major banks to the industry financing fairly modern fleets would have broadly expected to end up. But I think it is, as Paul says, it's the ability of the industry with the knowledge of that data to take many, many steps to actually improve emissions. So I would say to those signatories who are worried they might be out of alignment, 12 out of the 15 of us are out of alignment. Join us, even if you think you may not be out of alignment, because we will be encouraging everyone to focus on this data and to help shipping as an industry get into alignment. The second thing, I think, two other things. One is a number we know we're waiting to see how the process worked. And I think, as Paul has said, and I've said, the process actually worked very well. So there's nothing to fear about that. And the participation of ship owners was great. I think the other thing we shouldn't forget, Citi yesterday published our second TCFD report. The Task Force on Climate-Related Finance Disclosure is going to mean a lot to every single bank, at least in the Western world, if I put it that way. But essentially, all major banks are going to be governed by their regulators, by what they're doing around the impact of their portfolios on climate and climate alignment, already being led in Europe by certain countries. So the TCFD work ought to encourage other signatories that, from their own banks' perspectives, being part of this first mover called the Poseidon Principles would be a good thing if they have experience and exposure rather to the industry, and join us as soon as possible so we can actually start sharing the information, not on a client basis but on a sort of sector basis with new signatories, so they can build up an understanding ahead of next year's report. And let's remember, there are only about 10 days, 15 days of emissions in 2020, which we'll be reporting on this time next year. And so, join us now.
Hugo, and then from the owner's perspective, what do you think it means for owners, either below or above the trajectory, just to sign up and incorporate this into their documentation?
Well, I think that there are many remarks that Paul said, which sort of puts us in a good place, because we do long hauls. We don't tend to spend too much time in port, and we do have a modern fleet. So that's great. But I think that what he also said is that regardless of the age or the quality of your fleet, there are so many things that you can do to win a couple of years or even more on that trajectory. So even if you are behind today, there's plenty of stuff that you can do. Certainly engage with a lot of them. At the moment, we are ahead of the trajectory. That doesn't mean that we should stop. And certainly for the other ship owners, big message is wherever you are, you can do better. And it doesn't mean scrap your ship and build a new one. Far from it. In fact, on the existing asset, there's a lot of things that you can do. The rest, I think that there might be from time to time mismatch between sort of what we report and what we targeted, and the other area that is very important, and I can share it, even though we haven't published our 2020 emissions and we haven't really calculated it. We did it for the first 6 months. In our sector, and I suppose the same for many sectors, when the market is booming, then you're going to emit more, simply because the demand for your service is going to be more elevated, and you're going to spend more time at sea, and from time to time, even rightfully or wrongly, pushing on the accelerator. So all of that will become parameters which people will take into account, and I think that's also part of the global effort, is what do you do in those circumstances, knowing that you have another parameter to take into account.
Lewis, I think the imperative for decarbonisation is very clear. And do you believe things like the Poseidon Principles, the Sea Cargo Charter go far enough, or do you think there's more regulation needed just to ensure that there's a level playing field for everyone?
You know, I'm a big fan of getting everybody on board, and I think Paul spent a couple of minutes there just starting to delve into. You can see an overall score, but underneath of that it is all of the complexity. I mean, the world can't simply say, oh, we don't need any small ships, right? I mean, that's not going to happen. So, to Hugo's point, you have to start at the very basics, with everybody laying down their baseline and then making those improvements every year. So even if you're off the target, now you got to start trying to get on that trajectory. And I think the Poseidon Principles is excellent. It's an early start. We'd like to see the broader banking shipping community get on board. We know in shipping there will never be a perfectly level playing field. However, a broader based approach would be very welcome by owners.
Yeah, I said when there are some owners that can access funding, maybe without having so mindful of ESG conditions, it does make it harder. So while in the regulation that's coming, like as Michael mentioned, the TCFD and things that are coming down the line, I think they will imposing outside of that.
No, I agree with you there, Lindsay. And listen, in our world, Hugo's company, our company, we're publicly traded, we're highly transparent. We comply with all corruption practices in the world, with all sanctions trading, and the broader based. This is just another tenet, and the broader it can become, so that the people who are working together to achieve higher efficiency, the happier we are.
I suppose, Hugo, as you've already said yourself, the position for yourselves is very different because of the business that you have, and large ship owners with the resources available for all of this. Maybe some of the smaller owners are thinking, well, it's easier for them. They're much bigger organisations. What do you think the impact's going to be on some of the smaller ship owners of initiatives like this?
Well, there I have to be honest. So I just said that, of course, you can do a lot of things on your ships, but size definitely helps. I mean, when I see the program that we have, there are fairly large economies of scale. So there's going to be a cost advantage to the ones who have a relatively larger fleet. I have no doubt about that. That's very much for the hardware. As far as what I dare to call the software, it's equally important. That you have a decent size, and the software is, well, the real software, because we talked about digitalization, and God knows that it can help us also improving our emissions, but it's also about the people on board the ships. And I think if you can run relatively large programs, such as talking about this and talking about the values of the companies and talking about why you're doing this effort, then it means a lot to the people. They are more motivated, and therefore they will do a better job in helping you achieving your targets. And I think that when you are looking at doing those kind of things, it's always easier if you start from a large base, because you have more resources to allocate to this without really impacting your overall cost.
Yeah. Lois and Hugo, my question to both of you. What would you like to see the Poseidon Principles extended to cover in the future?
I think just increasingly enhanced focus on operational excellence is absolutely critical, and that goes to winning the hearts and minds of everybody on board, as well as to the office. And then I think it probably will broaden to other greenhouse gases going forward. So I think there's room for an expansion of the Poseidon Principles as we mature.
Hugo, anything from your side?
Well, I will, as a follow-up to what Lois said, even though that was my second point, I think that we need to look at more greenhouse gas. I mean, we're on the verge of looking at new technologies, which are obviously emitting less CO2. Some of them are zero emissions, so that's not a problem. Some of them are lowering the CO2 emissions, but potentially increasing other greenhouse gases. So definitely something to incorporate so that we are not shifting one gas for another and pretend that we are good at it. I mean, the big picture is obviously to decrease what we're doing to the climate, and that's very important. The second thing that I wanted to say, and I know that Michael and Paul will laugh at me, is when we were drafting those principles, I was a very serious advocate about a stick and a carrot. And I thought that the stick in the carrot should increase in size, in fact, because today, when you sign a loan agreement and you incorporate the Poseidon Principle, you may benefit, if you reach your goal, you may benefit from a reduction of margin, but this reduction of margin is relatively small. It doesn't really move the needle, and I would hope that in due course, this can be increased and you really reward the guys who are doing this effort and to a certain extent beating the simple trajectory, as opposed to the others who are either ignoring it or just sticking by the minimal rule, if I may use that expression.
Paul, maybe over to you. Michael already touched on the TCFD, and I think with that and the EU taxonomy coming, which is also going to cover the maritime space, do you think it's incumbent on both financiers and owners to actually sort of take positive action to get behind industry-led initiatives? Otherwise, you may find regulators coming up with something which isn't fit for purpose.
Well, I do, and I've said this quite a few times, that it's so important to be seen as leading. Let's set our own direction of travel, speed of travel, and also innovate as well. And let's not just wait to be regulated. It's so important that we are in some control of where we're heading. And I think the Poseidon Principles clearly does give us some degree of leverage. But I think the Poseidon Principles and the EU taxonomy, I mean, they're not completely aligned, but I think they can work together. You look at the EU taxonomy, for example, is quite idealistic. If you look through the criteria to be green that's been drafted, there's about 5 of them, I think. It's very difficult for the shipping industry, apart from very, very short haul vessels, which could be powered by battery or electricity, to be aligned with the EU taxonomy. So shipping is not going to be green for a long period of time, and that's going to push away, it's going to block external investment in the sector at a time when we're very keen for there to be external investment. Where the Poseidon Principle comes in, and I was mentioning this earlier on, is that it's not all about new investment. It's about making the best of what everybody has, optimizing the efficiency of the fleets. And what I'd really like to see is more cooperation between the IMO and the banks, so that existing vessels which actually optimize themselves so they become efficient and they're meeting these AER trajectories over time, meeting the IMO targets, would benefit from some of the EU taxonomy. And at the moment, that clearly is not drafted, it's not intended. But I think together there could be something quite powerful. And so it's only right that banks, export credits do take the lead, do self-regulate, but in the hope that the EU taxonomy can actually incorporate some of these great initiatives.
And then, Michael, maybe a final word from you as to where next for the Poseidon Principles and moving the needle further forward.
Well, I think, let me just sort of finish with 3 things. I think first, I was waiting for the carrots and sticks to appear, and they did. And I think Hugo makes a very good point. My answer really is the financial markets, of which shipping finance is a very tiny piece, but the broader financial markets are beginning to do that. And I think with the examples of Lois in International Seaways and a few other clients already, the adoption, and I think that adoption in the loan market as well as the bond market will pick up, so that we do reward in the way that Hugo wants. I think what he wanted was immediate reward, and we couldn't provide it to him then, but I think he will get it. And I think that because markets generally will do that. I think the second thing is it's about transition. And as Paul and I both said, you know, retrofitting and the lowering of emissions en route to zero is very, very important. And it's having that transparent data that is very important. And that's really what we do with the Poseidon Principles, whose methodology has spawned, if you like, the Sea Cargo Charter and the Climate Bond Initiative's work on defining what is green and sustainable in shipping. I think the third and most important point in a way is the US election means that the US has rejoined the focus from its government come late January. And therefore, you know, the leadership the EU has given on taxonomy is great, but I think it's going to become global and has to become global. It's very important that for an industry that is regulated globally by the IMO, that is reinforced, but reinforced in a way that respects general views from around the world and isn't imposed in a way that is inefficient for shipping, unfair to shipping, or just inappropriate. It is that collaboration and taking a lead that all of us represented here and the wider membership of the Global Maritime Forum, the Getting to Zero Coalition, all the other shipping coalitions that are focused on this issue. It's that collaboration that actually will, as Paul says, will actually go faster maybe than actual regulation. But we're doing what the end consumer wants. Shipping is about moving things from A to B because someone else has a commercial contract. And it's the consumers and the manufacturers with the transparency of data in what they buy and what they produce that is going to be driving this. And shipping can benefit from that. And the final word I want to use, which I used in Singapore, is this is going to make the industry much more profitable.
And just, I suppose the financing that's going to be needed to achieve decarbonisation. A lot of the capital from the capital markets is going to need more transparency and governance issues. So do you see that there's need for those to also be looked at by the Poseidon Principles, or you see that outside of your scope?
No, I think we've said we don't want to get involved in politics, if we put it that way. We didn't touch on IMO 2020 because it was part of a regulation that was already there. We've said publicly we would expect the Hong Kong Convention ratification to get incorporated into the Poseidon Principles. I think Hugo touched on it. Other greenhouse gas emissions is something also we should look at. We want to do this in step with the IMO as it evolves its regulation, but also to encourage far-sighted owners who want us in a way to be supportive of what they're trying to do, that we should look at that. So this remains a mutually reinforcing process. Responsible lenders working with responsible owners has to continue throughout the future of the Poseidon Principle.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So over to the Q&A, I believe, unless anyone has anything else.
No, thank you, Lindsay. And thank you, the panel, for answering all those fantastic questions. So we actually have a lot of questions that have come in from the audience, which is fantastic to see. So thank you, audience, for that. So I'm going to ask that we try to keep these questions the answers as concise as possible. But the first one is to the panel as a whole. It seems that the goal for year one was data collection. What is the goal of year two? And maybe we can kind of answer this from the banking side of it and then from the owner side of it. So Michael and Paul, do you want to maybe kick off the answer to that question first?
I'm happy to start. I think for us, I believe the first thing has to be analysis and reflection. We have to understand the results. This is actually key because it will drive behavioural change. We need to give feedback to our clients. That's really important. We've asked for a lot of information. We've asked for their support. They've given it, and now we owe them feedback on the results. So I think there's going to be a period of time at the beginning of next year where we are working with the ship owners, explaining results, working together as to why the results might have been as they are, and then from there we can move forwards. I also think there'll probably be the start of a technical committee within the Poseidon Principles where we'll look at imperfections that may have existed and developed over time, relating to the trajectories, relating to the the metrics used. So there's a lot of work to do without changing the full scope of the Poseidon Principles, just to make sure that our results are fully understood, and that they are representative of the businesses that we have.
Michael, do you want to follow up, or should we toss it over to Lois and Hugo?
No, over to Lois and Hugo.
Okay, improvement, and it's something that is already ongoing. On board our ships, every time one of our vessels has a dry dock period, it's what can we do? We're going to put on Mavis ducts for efficiency improvement. Are we going to make the slick paint? What can we do to improve as we move along the trajectory?
Yeah, I think that for me, one of the objectives that we should set for ourselves, and sorry, because this is a challenge for Michael and Paul, is to try to onboard many more banks, and it's specifically in Asia. I think that we just touched on the subject of what's going to happen in Europe, and the taxonomy is definitely a risk and a threat for this industry at a time where we will need a lot of capital to transform ourselves. If we have unfair competition coming from the Far East, I think it will make the exercise only more complicated. So if I were to look or to put a wish list on the table for 21, my primary goal would be, well, let's make sure that we get many more banks as signatories for the initiative.
Right. If I can just come in there, and if I just quickly come in, Jonathan, I agree fully with Hugo, and we'd like the help of supportive owners in that. I think Paul and I have spent time. He and I personally will spend a lot of time in 2021 focused on particularly the Asian institutions, and collectively, the steering committee of our association are all going to help in the attempt to get more people signed up. So I fully accept that, Hugo. We do expect to achieve it. But when I saw President Xi's announcement of net zero by 2060 for China, it gave me some encouragement that Chinese state-owned institutions will take actions that are consistent with that new policy.
Very true. And once they take the decision, they can go very, very fast, as we know.
Right. And to kind of play off of that, we had a question that came in. Thank you to the panel and the Poseidon Principles and its members for increasing the transparency of our industry. I'm especially struck by the companies that were willing to publish results when they didn't quite meet their goals, in addition to those who did. However, what are the mechanisms for recruiting more members and broadening the reporting? I know that you touched on a little bit, Michael, but I wonder if that you could answer that directly a little bit.
Well, look, we shipping finance is a fairly small community, and we've lost various members of that in the last 10 years for mostly self-inflicted reasons. But this is unknown and understood. I think we can use the word pressure. We can talk about it being voluntary. I think, as we've said, this is not about what your result was. It's about continuous improvement, which we know is also going to be challenging, as Paul and Hugo both talked about. So we feel that people should sign up to this, and I think the Sea Cargo Charter and other initiatives helps reinforce that, because anyone committed to lowering emissions is meeting a much broader target. And for financial institutions, I think the regulators of banks in particular are paying much more attention to this, and therefore signing up to the Poseidon Principles, if you are a shipping lender, really is very easy to do. The Secretariat and the other signatories are talking to people who've not yet signed, and we want them to join. So we'll continue to proselytize this as long as it takes.
Great. Question for Hugo and Lois. Will your clients be prepared to pay premium to companies/vessels which are aligned? Will they even be transparent about this?
Hugo, you go ahead.
I don't think so at the moment. I think that it may come. I can see that in other sectors, conversations are more advanced. I think that in our sector, particularly, I think for Lois and myself, we are talking to people who are very active active in fossil fuels. We're talking about oil and gas companies, so it seems to me more natural that they will not be the first one to inflict themselves an additional pain by paying a premium. Having said that, they're all having now a lot of thoughts about the future. They're all saying that they will start to invest and diversify from their core activities. And I think that we're not going to have to wait too long before they come to us and say, well, we need to improve our global carbon footprint, and we need to employ the most efficient ships. What do you have in your portfolio that meets those targets? And potentially we can start a discussion around, well, I have this ship who's super performing in terms of not emitting too much, but indeed it cost me more money, so I need more reward. But I have to be frank, today I've never had this kind of conversation, nor did my commercial team.
Yeah, no, I would echo what Hugo's saying, but I do believe over time, and that could move quite quickly, you know, where that does evolve.
Okay, fantastic. Heading over to Michael and Paul, were you surprised that so many of the large shipping banks are not in compliance with the Poseidon Principles?
No.
No.
And then to follow up on that, what banks are willing to do to fix current issues of sustainable ship recycling? Is it possible to extend the Poseidon Principle commitments to the ship recycling sector?
Well, I've said the existing legislation is European legislation. We decided to tie ourselves to the IMO around this because this is a global effort, and so we have said, we're not committed officially, but we've said the Hong Kong Convention on this issue is the logical thing for us to bring into become another of the Poseidon Principles when it is ratified, and that will then help reinforce that the signatories will take certain steps. We'll have to flesh out what that means, but essentially we will be, as signatories, using the recycling and scrapping as a standard and measure defined through the Hong Kong Convention as part of the business the signatories are doing. I don't know, Paul, you want to add something to that?
No, I'm not really, other than to say that we can widen the scope of the Poseidon Principle in due course. I don't think it's necessarily immediately around the corner that we're going to incorporate the green scrapping of ships, but the whole Poseidon Principles Association has been set up with the sort of remit and the ability to include it if necessary. Can I just go back to the previous question? I think it's a really important one about whether we're surprised about the alignment of the banks, because I think this is a key question. I mean, let's not get away from the fact that this sector needs to decarbonize. So this is where we are, and in fact, if you take cruise out of the results, and cruise has a slightly different approach than the cargo vessels, there'll be a much greater misalignment across the scores, across cargo vessels, and that reflects where we are today. So we have to accept that across the shipping sector, the real industrial shipping sector, there's already misalignment. So I talk about extending the alignment runway. Well, we're already in deficit. So it's about behavioral change for everybody, for the banks that have signed up, but hopefully for the banks who haven't signed up and who are going to sign up, they realize that the whole sector needs to address the way they go about financing the existing ships.
Great, thank you for clearing that up. I know that we are over time right now, but I'm assuming that none of the panelists have a meeting until 10:30. So I'm going to maybe do one or two more questions before I let you go for that. Hugo and Lois, do your large shareholders, the ones that you know best, support or push you towards the Poseidon Principles direction, or is that something you did completely, through your own direction?
At Seaways, I would say it's a mixture, but largely it is our own direction, and it is certainly something that we discuss with shareholders, and that I think is becoming increasingly important to shareholders as we see, some of the leading hedge funds, incorporate all different tenets of ESG, not just social and governance, but also now the environmental.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit the same at Euronav. I mean, we have 200 million shares, and we probably have hundreds of thousands of shareholders. So I don't think you can put all of them in the same category. The only thing I can tell you is that up until last year, this year, in fact, the fourth quarter, I rarely had a question around ESG topics, and particularly on the E. With the publication of the fourth quarter, we had a few. With the publication of the third quarter, which was last month, I don't believe I had one discussion with an investor not touching on these aspects. And that is a clear acceleration, whether it's due to COVID or anything else, it doesn't matter. It's at the top of the agenda of many, many people. And even the ones who wanted to ignore it for a couple more years can no longer ignore it, because it has an impact on the valuation of our public companies. As if the majority of the investors are now looking at it, the ones that don't look at it will be the victims of the ones that are looking at it, because they will either disinvest or invest in the companies that are trying to do better.
Great. And I think one final question for Michael and Paul. Did you get the data directly from the owners? What was your experience in that regard? Was it very time consuming? Like if we were to do it, how would we go about it?
Well, you go first.
Well, I think Michael addressed this point right at the beginning. It wasn't completely without work for the banks or for the ship owners, and of course the ship owners would have received similar requests from multiple banks. So there was work involved, but I can be completely transparent in saying that it wasn't nearly as much work for the bank's perspective as I expected. The requests were sent once the rather lengthy process of agreeing the content of the acknowledgement letter had been agreed for confidentiality reasons. They were sent out, and then the data came through over a period of a couple of months. And actually, I think it was a reasonably smooth process, albeit it can be improved going forwards. But certainly not a reason to not be a signatory. There's no reason in the process not to become a signatory.
We kept it simple intentionally for banks and for owners. And remember, last year was the first year of this ETS regulation. So this was the first for ship owners, even for those who were already disclosing it. This was the first time the regulation, the IMO, came in. And I think the thing we learned, it wasn't difficult, but you actually have to start from the thing that all banks have to do, which is KYC, know your customer. So when you start with knowing who your customers are, what ships you had a mortgage over, I think that's the most important thing. To start out, you need to actually know what vessels you have a mortgage over in order to be able, and an IMO number, in order to be able to ask the right person for that data. So once you've started that, and I think for all the existing signatories, getting some of that sort of data into order was probably, the more time-consuming piece, which we now all have. So it is a straightforward process, and as Paul says, we'll be looking at how we can improve on it. I think there are a couple of other things that came out very briefly. One is we are in a lot of syndicated loans, and I think we did some cross-checking without breaching any confidentiality that the same banks were getting the same AER information. That was obviously important just to check. And I think the second thing is there have been some situations of some owners putting conditions on providing the information, which some signatories accepted and some didn't. And we'll have to iron that out, because I think on the apples to apples principle, we want to make sure that if an owner is providing information, we either all use it or none of us use it. So there are things like that we couldn't have anticipated, which we will learn from. And I think the results will still be in the high 90% just by virtue of the way the industry operates. But it is much easier than people may have feared, and for that reason, that is not an excuse for anyone not to sign up.
Well, fantastic. I wish I could go on because there are many, many more questions that need answering. However, I think what we'll do is that we'll try to connect those questions with the panelists after this meeting. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Jim to take this home.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Lindsay, Lois, Hugo, Paul, and Michael. That was truly a privilege for us all. Thank you. And I'm happy to repeat myself by saying that for Marine Money, your efforts, commitment to continued improvement and to our planet, your seafarers and colleagues, those are the best examples of who we are as an industry and why shareholders, financiers, your customers, governments, and the general public will look at our industry and your companies with new eyes. And we can be very proud of who we are and what we are. So this brings our webinar year to a close. I will just say again, thank you to everybody. Wish everyone a safe and happy holiday. Confident we shall all be together in 2021. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thank you.
Bye.